So let me start this morning. We're going to start a quick 2-week series, and it's a series that we'll probably go back to a couple of times during the year. 2 weeks only because Lent is coming up. But let me start this morning in our series. I want to read you guys a poem. Now, normally poems, I'm not a poet. Poems, I normally read them, and I'm like, I don't know, it doesn't make sense to me, it doesn't rhyme, or I don't know. Poems very rarely speak to me, to be honest with you. So there's a poem, though, that I have had in my notes for like a couple of months that I read every once in a while that really is so powerful to me. And it's like, it doesn't make sense that it does, because it's called The Housewife, is the name of the poem. So it doesn't necessarily on the outside of it really apply to me, yet it's something that continually speaks to my heart. So this poem is from an American poet. Her name is Faye Inchfawn. And so here, let me read this. This is called The Housewife. And it says, "See, I am cumbered, Lord, with serving and with small vexatious things. Upstairs and down, my feet must hasten sure and fleet. So weary that I could not heed thy word. So tired I cannot now mount up with wings. How I wrestle through the hours. Nay, not with principalities nor powers, dark spiritual foes of gods and mans, but with antagonistic pots and pans, with footmarks in the hall, with smears upon the wall, with doubtful ears and small unwashen hands, and with a babe's innumerable demands. I toil with feverish haste while teardrops glisten. O child of mine, be still and listen. At last I lay aside important work no other hands could do so well, I thought, no skill contrive so true. And with my heart's door open and wide, with leisured feet and idle hands, I sat, foolish, fussy, blind as any bat, sat down to listen and to learn, and lo, my 1,000 tasks were done, the better so." There's just something about that just, I don't know why, but captures my heart, because I think that's all of us. We run around to serve. We run around if you're a parent with kids, you run around at work, you're busy, and you feel like, and in some sense it's very true, particularly for moms, there are things that only you can do. We feel like, gosh, if I don't do it, who's going to do it? But I love it because at the end she recognizes if I just stop for a moment, if I sit quietly, if I put those things aside, even for a moment, to connect with God, to have a heart that's open and willing to listen and to learn and to connect with God, actually what we find out is that things don't go undone. We actually find that things get done better. And there's just such a reminder in there for me that I can do and do and do. And we feel like that. There's a million things. There's more things on my to-do list today than I have hours in the day to do it. How could I possibly take time for God? How could I possibly take time to just sit quietly? How can I do it? But the reality is that when we actually take that time, we are more productive. We are more connected with the Lord. We are more filled with His presence. We are more genuinely who we were made to be if we take that time. That's what this series is about. The series is called Spiritual Rhythms, Attending to the Inner Life. We recognize that this world is busy, that there are demands on our time in a natural sense with our lives, with our work. Maybe we're parents, maybe we're shuffling our kids off to different things after school. So many of us wear as a badge of honor that line that says, "Oh, I'm busy." Right? We wear that as a badge of honor because it means importance and it means that I'm doing stuff. So our culture just screams, do, be busy, be busy. We can even fall into that trap in our faith, in our life and our journey with Jesus, that it's just about doing and doing. And as a church, we are very involved. I don't say that with any sense of shame. We want to be ones who are doing, who are serving the Lord, who are serving food, who are teaching kids, who fill in the blank, whatever it is that we do. We want to be a church that does. But we have to recognize that there needs to be in our life a rhythm of doing and a rhythm of being in God's presence. We can't continually do, because when we just do, we are going to crash and burn. We have to. It is imperative for our lives that we take time in rhythm to connect with God, to draw near to Him, to sit quietly, things like that. I love this analogy. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, is that if you ever go to there's two ways I could say it. Have you ever been to like a TV show or a movie and seen it filmed? Right, there's what probably caught your eye, besides like, oh, cool, oh my goodness, there's that person in front of me that I see on TV all the time. The thing that jumps out to you the most is just how much goes on behind the scenes. You know, you just went to what'd you go to see with Michelle? Who is it? Kelly and Mark. Yes, you had to go see Kelly and Mark, which was the old Regis Philbin show, right? And I saw a picture, and there's cameras, and there's directors, and there's help, and there's all these guys all around. What you see from home is the exterior. You see the finished product. What you don't see is what goes on behind the scenes. I think of it as like a play as well. You go to a play, you see the actors and actresses in front of you on the stage. What you don't see is what happens in the wings. You know, what you don't see is when the curtains are closed, all the hustle and bustle that's going on. What we're saying is that we live most of our lives on stage. We're doing is the public persona. This is who I am. It's so necessary for us to do is attend to those backstage moments. Because who we are on the front stage, who we are on camera, who we are as we live our lives in front of people is largely informed by who we are behind the scenes. And what we're doing is we connect with God. It's imperative that we have a correct spiritual balance and rhythm. You see rhythm all over. You see rhythm in nature all the time, right? You see, we were just in Rhode Island and we were near the ocean. And you see the ocean waves, right, crashing in, and then the water rushing back into the ocean, and the waves crashing in. You see the tides come in, you see the tides come out. We have the sun coming up in the morning, and then the sun setting, and the moon coming out. We have the rhythm of night and day. We have the rhythm of seasons. We're so close to spring, I can't wait. Right, and so we're almost done with the cold and the dark and the bleak winter. And then spring is almost upon us, and so we see these rhythms in nature. These rhythms are so important in our own lives. Our lives just lived out in front of people, our spiritual lives as we pursue Jesus. And so again, this series is called, and you could hit the slide, it is Spiritual Rhythms, Attending to the Inner Life. We're talking about the behind-the-scenes work. God is calling us, by the way, deeper. I believe that God is calling us deeper through His Spirit. The scripture we'll talk about in a minute is that as deep cries out to deep. There's a sense that God is calling you deeper in your spiritual life. That our journey with Jesus is not about just coming to church on a Sunday, and it's not just about doing. It is also about, that's what's amazing about Christianity. It's what's amazing about Jesus, is that it's real. That Jesus invites you into this relationship where you get to actually know Him and experience Him and spend time with Him. This is what we so desperately need in our lives, this kind of rhythm where we take that time to be with Him. We want to drink deep of what God is doing in our hearts. We want a faith that is not a mile wide and an inch deep. We can be that way. We can have a mile-wide faith, right? To me, a mile wide is the things that we do externally. You know, we could serve, we can come to church every weekend, we can do, which is great. There's rhythm. I'm not saying one is better than the other. They're both important. But we can be this. I think what God is calling us to remember is that we also need depth to our spiritual life, our journey with Jesus. And that depth is found and is developed as we take time to be with God in the quiet. What we're going to talk about, ultimately what this series is going to be about, today is just an introduction, is about spiritual disciplines. We want to introduce you to this idea, or something that you might be familiar with already, is the idea of spiritual disciplines. Do I have a list of spiritual disciplines? Things like prayer, things like fasting, Bible readings, Bible study, solitude and silence and simplicity, worship, taking a Sabbath, meditating on Scripture, journaling, worshiping or celebrating together. These are the traditional spiritual disciplines that the church has undertaken. That's what we want to introduce you to. That's what we want to talk to you about during this series. And as I said, it's something that we can come back to again and again, just in rhythm. Because much of what we preach is not so much what we preach, but I feel like a lot of what we do a lot of doing. And what I want us to remember, and this is what we talk about in our Grow class, actually, that's going to be coming up at the end of next month, is that any sense of doing has to come out of our sense of being. That makes sense? Right? That anything we do for the Lord has to come out of the overflow. It can never be that, I am earning his favor. It can never be like I'm the super Christian because I do these things, right? It has to come out of a heart that is growing in relationship with Jesus. That's what we want to encourage you to. That's what the spiritual disciplines do. Now you can say, and I think sometimes it's a critique about spiritual disciplines, is like, isn't that just just something else to do? Isn't that just like a spiritual checklist now that I have to do? I have to do these things? That's really not what they are, nor what they're meant to be. So the invitation of God is not to a series of religious duties. As we talk about spiritual disciplines, it's not like, here's just another thing to do. It's not that. We have only one thing to do, honestly, and that is to experience a life of relationship and intimacy with God our Father through His Spirit. Right? That's really what we have to do. And I'm reminded with that thought is Jesus to Mary and Martha. Right, you know the story. As Jesus is in the house of Mary and Martha, and Martha is running around doing. She's trying to do stuff with a good heart and right reason. She's trying to prepare a meal. Jesus is there. Let's feed him. Let's be hospitable. And she's upset that her sister is sitting at the feet of Jesus, quietly listening. And she says, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do or to serve all alone? I don't think this is going to come up, by the way, so don't worry about it. But the Lord's answer was this: Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. And Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. I love that. There's one thing needed, and it's not to do. It's not a list of things to do. It's not the meal checklist. It is to be in my presence, to sit quietly at my feet, to connect with me, because for us, just as he was present to Mary and Martha in that home, he is present to you in your home, in your place of prayer, wherever you are. He is there. And so can we choose to do the one thing that's required of us and just to know him and draw closer to him? And so the idea of spiritual disciplines is not another doing. It is a being activity. It is crucial for us to understand that these disciplines also to understand that these disciplines possess no moral value or righteousness in and of themselves. They are most definitely not works righteousness, as is sometimes said. And so we think about spiritual disciplines and these doing things as doing things. They're not, because you're not more righteous. You're not more holy. You're not more Christian because you take some time to pray, or you fasted this week, or you've read your Bible 10 days in a row, right? That's not what they are. The spiritual disciplines are meant to be a means of grace. What are they doing? They literally are just putting ourselves in position to experience God. That's all they are. And the church has discovered that through the years, that as we partake of these spiritual disciplines of, again, prayer and fasting and Sabbath and scripture reading and meditation, and there'll be a bunch. And I would say do some research. Take a look at some of the traditional spiritual disciplines. As we partake of them, what are we finding? Is that we are just placing ourselves in position to receive God's grace. Putting ourselves in position to experience God, to experience His Spirit and His presence with us. That's what we're doing. What they do, and I just want to read the way I worded it in my notes, what they do is place us, body, mind, and spirit, before God. In this sense, they are a means of grace. Remember that the opposite of grace is works. So what we don't want to fall into is works. So the opposite of grace is works, not effort. And I think we confuse that sometimes. The opposite of grace is works. It's not effort. The Bible will say, like, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. There's an aspect that as we do these things, we're putting it's not works, but it's effort. We're doing these things that are going to lead to us being in God's presence and experiencing Him deeper and deeper. Their only purpose is to place us before God, nothing more. But as we partake of them over time, and hear this because this is so true and so powerful, and if any of you have experienced the spiritual disciplines, if you've done them on a regular basis, you know this to be true. As we partake of them over time, God moves in our life, producing the formation of heart and mind and soul that we so desperately need and long for. God works powerfully as we partake of these things. And so I want to just talk about just 2 quick points about what's the importance, why as we partake of these spiritual disciplines is our lives changed. Because I don't want to overplay this thing, but I really feel like the key to like a life well lived, The key to longevity in ministry, the key to just being who you are authentically in your situations, the key to your spiritual life, to where you feel hungry for more of God, where you feel like there should be more. The key to experiencing those things is found in a rhythm of life where we partake of things like the spiritual disciplines. Because if we're only living on the outside, again, we're going to find ourselves brittle and thin. I don't want to overplay, I don't want to overpromise this stuff, but I do believe that this is like such a simple key to just life that works, a faith that works, is having rhythm in life where we make sure we take time to be with the Lord. And the first thing I want to look at is the reality that as we partake of these spiritual disciplines, that real change happens by attending to our inner life. That the change that you're looking for in your life, both just as you live your life out in front of people or your spiritual life, that real change happens as you attend to your inner life, as you attend to the behind the curtains kind of life. That's where the real change in your life begins and where it happens. Have you ever, it's crazy, isn't it? Woohoo! That was a woohoo, I think. Have you ever had something in your life that you wanted to change? Rhetorical question, because yes, I am sure that all of us would say, yes, man, there's 1.5 million things that I would love to see changed in my life. There's things that I wish I want to do that I don't. There's 1 million things that I do that I don't want to do. I for sure know that. So what we normally do is when we have that, when we've got sin in our lives, right? I mean, I'm smoking and I don't want to smoke anymore. I keep just having fits of anger and I don't want to do that anymore. Or fill in the blank, whatever it might look like for you. What we normally do to try to change that in our lives is launch like a full frontal attack. We just take this thing, I don't want to smoke anymore, and we launch a full frontal attack on it. I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm not going to do that anymore. I don't want to do it anymore. I'm not going to do it anymore. And what we really, at the end of the day, rely upon is our willpower to be able to change. Right? I'm just going to will myself. I'm going to hang this sign up that says, do not smoke. Right? And I'm not going to do it anymore. And we rely really on our willpower. What do we find? We find either that our willpower is not enough and you keep failing, or maybe you have some success because you're focusing on it and like you're finding some success. But I think inevitably, unless you're a person who's really, and if I am not, unless you're really a person of willpower, there's some folks out there who could just will themselves to change. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I think for the vast majority of us, maybe you're going to find no change or you're going to find temporary change, and eventually you're going to end up back in those same patterns again. That's what happens when we launch these full frontal attacks. Listen to these 2 quotes. This is from Emmett Fox, Christian author, and it says, as soon as you resist mentally any undesirable or unwanted circumstance, you thereby endow it with more power which it will use against you, and you will have depleted your own resources to that exact extent. Have you ever found that? Is that it's like, I'm going to stop doing this thing. This is the thing I want to stop. That all of a sudden, just by saying I want to resist it, all of a sudden it has all this power over us that we find we can't resist it just by putting the focus or attention on it. Another, this guy's name is, a good name, Heine Arnold. He was part of the Bruderhof community. He says, as long as we think we can save ourselves by our own willpower, we will not only make the evil in us strong, we will only make the evil in us stronger than ever. And so what we find is that when we launch full-scale frontal attacks on these things we want to change, actually what we do is we actually start imbibing them with power. They're harder to overcome when we take a direct attack. This is what Paul says, and I don't know if this is going to come up either, but in Romans, Paul talks about this. I don't even have it marked, but in Romans 7, if you have a Bible, you can open it up to there. Let me see if I can find Romans 7 really quickly. This is exactly what Paul is talking about when he's talking about the law. 7 through 10. It says, what shall we say? That the law is sin? By no means. Yet, if it had not been for the law, I would not have known sin. Right? If the law didn't say, don't covet, he wouldn't have known that you're not supposed to covet, that it's a sin. For I would have not known what it is to covet if the law had not said you shall not covet. But sin, seizing the opportunity through the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. As soon as there was a command, don't covet, what do you start doing? Coveting, right? You see this all the time. Maybe Mark and I were talking about this, that your kid's playing in a neighborhood and you've got the old person in the neighborhood with the beautiful flowers, right? And he's so worried that the kids are going to trample his flowers that he puts a sign up. They never noticed the flowers. They never went near them. But as soon as he puts the sign up that says, like, stay away from flowers or stay off the grass, what do they want to do? They want to go closer to them, right? They want to get closer to them. They want to, like, throw stuff, whatever. Like, that's what the law does, he's saying. That's what happens when we just try to say, I'm going to will myself to being different. And so he says, for apart from the law, sin is dead. I was once alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin came alive and I died. The very commandment that promised life proved to be death to me. For sin, seizing the opportunity through the commandment, deceived me, and through it killed me. So he says the law is holy, and the commandment is holy and righteous and good. I'm going to leave it there, but that's the idea. That's what he's saying. That's what's the problem with the law. He was saying for the Old Testament law is that it's just a bunch of things not to do. There's no power in them to actually change you. That's the reality, that when we just say, like, listen, I am not going to sin, I'm not going to do this anymore, we actually imbibe power to it. And even if we do it, it doesn't change our hearts, which is what Jesus is looking for. It's just us following a rule. I'm not going to smoke anymore. I'm not going to drink anymore. It just becomes a rule. It doesn't actually change us. What changes us? God's presence and God's Spirit within us. That's what changes us. That's what changes us. And so if we launch a full-scale frontal attack, we end up missing real change in our lives. What do we need to do? We need to be able to connect with God, allow His Spirit to work in us, things like the fruits of the Spirit. And we do that as we take rhythm in life, right? As we take time to be with the Lord, to connect with Him, to pray, to read, to meditate, to allow His Spirit to work in our lives. That's where we find it. This is, the author of Colossians says it kind of like this. He's talking the same thing about the law and grace, and he goes, do not handle. This is Colossians 2. There is a script. Here we go. Here it is. So he's quoting like some of the things that the people would say, like don't handle, don't taste, don't touch. There we go. Referring to things that, I'm going to read it on my notes, referring to things that all perish as they are used, according to human precepts and teachings. These have indeed appearance of wisdom in promoting self-made religion and asceticism and severity to the body, but they are of no value in stopping the indulgences of the flesh. What is it saying? That these things, don't touch, don't eat, don't smoke, don't drink, don't do this, don't do that, don't covet, right? It has an appearance of holiness, and it does, because there are right ways to live. But what is it? It does, King James says, what is it? It produces will worship. That's kind of the way they say, promoting self-made religion. King James translate that as will worship. It produces will worship. That if I just work hard enough, if I just do it, then I'll look holy. But it so truly says at the end of it, it says it has no power for stopping the indulgences of the flesh. That there's really no power. Just willing it just doesn't change it. It doesn't change your desire to drink. It doesn't change your desire to covet. It doesn't change your desire to smoke. Just saying don't do it. What changes us is the Spirit of God in us. That's what changes us. And so if we attack it head on, we miss it. But if we do a side attack, I'm going to connect with the Lord, right? I'm going to allow Him to work in my life and change me. We find actually the change that we really need. And so this idea of will worship may produce an outward show of success for a time, but as I said, it has no power to produce actual change. Paul in Romans 8 says, "For the law of the Spirit of life has set you free in Christ Jesus from the law of sin and death." Right? God's presence in you, His Spirit in you has set you free from just simply following some rules. For God has done what the law, weakened by the flesh, could not do. Right? The law was actually, it doesn't change you on the inside. He goes, but God has done something by sending His own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and for sin, He condemned sin in the flesh in order that the righteous requirement of the law might be fulfilled in us who walk not according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit of God. Jesus has overcome all temptation. Jesus has overcome all sin. And in Him, as we connect to Him, as we are led by the Spirit and not by the law, we actually find the victory of Jesus becomes real in our lives. He says, for those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit set their minds on the things of the Spirit. So I would say to you, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the sinful nature. And how do we walk by the Spirit? There's a walking out day by day, but there's also, I think, this rhythm of like taking time to connect with God. to be in his presence, to ask him to help you, to pray, to read Scripture, to find that the Spirit in you produces these changes that you want. That makes sense? Number 2, just quickly, is so real change. Why is rhythm so important? Because real change happens as we attend to the inner life. But also, the second thing I want to hit on quickly is that our outer life is a reflection of our inner life. Our outer life is a reflection of our inner life. The TV shows that you see, the plays that you watch, it's not just the stars who deserve all the credit. It's the people behind the scenes, right? Our behind-the-scenes life is really what allows our front and center, our doing life, to be what it is for the long term. This was Jesus' biggest critique of the religious folks of his day, the Pharisees, who were following the law. Right? In Matthew 23, what does he say? He goes like, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. He's like, you're hypocrites. For you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanliness. He's like, you look great on the outside. You follow all the rules. The religious folks that Jesus was all over, they looked really good. That's the way you'd want to live, the things that they're doing. That's what we want to do. But the problem was on the inside, they were dead. They were far from God. They didn't know God. They didn't have a relationship with him in any way, shape, or form. And so we could look really spiffy on the outside, but still be dead on the inside. We could have faith that's a mile wide, but an inch deep. As we live in rhythm, as we connect with God through things like prayer and fasting and Sabbath taking and blah, 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 all these, we find that we have depth, that we're actually changed on the inside. And what we find out is actually what's on the inside is what eventually comes out on the outside. That's the problem with a thin faith. That was the problem with the Pharisees, right? When we live life, who we are, if the situations are controlled, we can be pretty good, right? Just by following rules. But if we're shaken, if we're jostled, which happens every day as we live with people. There are things that shake us. The real you is going to come out eventually. Right? You can only hide it for so long. The real you will come out. How important is it then that we feed the real you, the behind-the-scenes you, the behind-the-curtain you? Because that's what's going to come out. And it's so important now, too, as we just finished that series talking about how this younger generation doesn't trust the church, doesn't have a high view of organized religion or any kind of big business kind of things. I think it's so imperative for us to just not live with our words, to not just have a faith that's thin, but to have a faith that's we have to really live the message. We have to be authentic. Jesus called the Pharisees hypocrites. We don't want to be hypocrites, saying one thing and doing another. And so it's so, so important. And how do we do that? How do we not be hypocrites? How do we not say one thing and do another? It's attend to your inner life. Because that's what changes you, and that's what's going to come out when you're shaken. I say that all the time, right? If I didn't have a lid on this is my coffee cup. If I got shaken, what's going to come out? If I spill this, what's going to come out? Coffee. What's in there is going to come out. What's in you is what's going to come out. And so if there's anger and there's frustration and there's things like that in you, that's what's going to come out. But if you've attended to your inner life and you're starting to grow in that place, you're starting to see the fruit of the Spirit developed in your life, what's going to become coming out more and more? Love and joy and peace and patience. Those are the things that are going to come out. And so it's imperative that we live these things because of that. Let me finish with this. These are just not, as we talk about spiritual disciplines and attending to the inner life, this is not just nice things that we've made up. This is who Jesus was. Jesus was who he was because of what he did. Let me read this account in the life of Jesus from Mark chapter 1. So this is the beginning of Mark's gospel. You've got Jesus doing, right? Again, what we're trying to say is doing is not bad. We want to be ones who do, who live a life externally and focused on others and serving others. This is who Jesus was. And so in chapter 1 of Mark, it says in verse 29, and immediately he left the synagogue. He had been teaching in the synagogue, and he enters the house of Simon and Andrew. This is Peter's house, with James and John. Now Simon, Peter's mother-in-law, was ill with a fever, and immediately they told him, Jesus, about her. And he came and took her by the hand and lifted her up, and the fever left her, and she began to serve them. So Jesus is doing. He is bringing healing to this sick woman. And it says, so he's been teaching at the synagogue. He's healing in the midst of the house. And he goes, that evening at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick or oppressed by demons. And the whole city was gathered together at the door. And he healed many who were sick with various diseases. He cast out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. So you get this image of Jesus. This is the doing. This is the ministry of Jesus. That's what he came to do, to teach and to heal and to cast out demons. But then you get the rhythm in Jesus' life. It says, and rising, verse 35, which is so huge for us today. And rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went to a desolate place, and there he prayed. Man, if Jesus needed to go to be with the Father, if Jesus needed to take some time to sit quietly after a busy day, if Jesus needed to recharge his batteries and connect with God, how much more do we need it? Oh my goodness, right? And so this is what Jesus did. This is so important. This is what we do as well. And Luke records it a little differently, another account. In Luke 5, it says, but now even more the report about him went abroad, and great crowds gathered to hear him and to be healed of their infirmities. But he would withdraw to desolate places and pray, right? Same thing. The bigger his ministry was getting, the more he would connect. He would take time to be alone with the Father. Again, how much more so for us? And so I end with these kind of questions for you. Are you living in rhythm? Or is your faith mostly in your life external activity? It's a great question. Are you living in rhythm? Are you taking time to swing to the side where you sit quietly, where you take time with the Lord? How will you incorporate rest and solitude into your daily life? And so, are you on rhythm? And if not, where might you be able to, like the poet, right? That Inchthorn poem, where are you going to actually lay aside all those things that you need to do? For the best thing you can do is to actually have a heart that's open and connect with God. What spiritual disciplines will you engage in to help you grow deeper and attend to your inner life? And again, we'll hit these as we do. We'll hit one next week, a little bit next week. I think from time to time throughout the year we'll hit it. But I'm going to offer you some authors and books in just a minute. But consider these spiritual disciplines. Is there one that maybe God is highlighting to you that you might be able to begin to partake in? If your outer life is a reflection of your inner life, what changes might God be inviting you to make internally? So if this is true, if your outer life is actually a reflection of what's going on inside, is there an invitation by God? Is there something in your outer life that God might want to change through meeting you in your inner life? And so I would say a challenge. Identify a spiritual discipline to intentionally cultivate. Set a time to practice it. Be intentional about it. It's going to be this time or that time. We have, as I mentioned earlier, just other ways that we can kind of connect to this. We have our Grow class coming up. So the end of March, there's a fifth Sunday. There'll be one service at 10 o'clock. And then after the service, this quarter is what we call our Grow class. If you remember our baseball diamond for our discipleship classes, this is first base. Grow. How do I grow in my relationship with Jesus? And so we'll be offering that at that first level. We'll talk about some of these things some more. But then if you've taken that Grow already, we're the Grow 2, the second time, if you've taken the first one, Pastor Lou is going to do that class. And what he's doing is he's taking his book. He had written a book a number of years ago. I think it's called Elements of a Prosperous Soul. And he's going to kind of summarize his book in an hour and a half or so about what he's teaching us through that book of how do we connect with God. We'll also have our Connect class that day. So if you're maybe new here, you've been hanging out for a little while, you want to learn a little bit about the church and how do you connect to it further, that's the day we'll be having those classes. So you can go to our app or our website and our calendar events. You can begin to sign up for those. And so that's one way you can connect to this series. And if you pre-register, here's the offer today, there's more. If you pre-register for one of those classes, we will provide lunch for you. And so we would love to have you. We'll attend to the inner life first, the inner life of our bellies, and then we will do class. Lent is coming up. As I mentioned, there's a participant's guide. So there's ways that you can, spiritual disciplines are worked into there. We're going to encourage everybody to try some type of fast on Wednesdays. There's opportunities to pray for yourself, for your church, for people that you want to be praying for our area. There's prayer things. There's Bible reading within that participant's guide. So Lent will be kind of a built-in opportunity for us to grow in these areas. And then I meant to have a fuller list, and I forgot to add them. Richard Foster is a wonderful author that writes about spiritual disciplines. Ruth Haley Barton is another one. And I could probably list 15 more, but I didn't write any of them down. And so if you're interested, maybe I'll put out a list this week. If you're a reader and you just want to read and learn a little bit more about these, you can engage that way as well.